So I'm going to admit that I don't fully understand some of this. And it's the Europol new report, the 2025 EU Serious and Organised Crime Threat Assessment. And we have spoken about these before, but this one suggests that criminal organisations are colluding with hostile states to attack democracy and security. Now, they haven't named Russia, but they are suggesting that states like Russia are basically colluding with criminal networks in order to carry out cyber attacks, to do their money laundering for them. And we have heard before, although it doesn't seem to be in this, now they're talking about disinformation campaigns as well. So that's very high-end sort of election attacks. But we have heard before that they have also been investing in shipments of drugs, the likes of Russia, with the Kinahan organisation.
Yeah, I mean, it is a complex kind of report. They do it every couple of years. I don't even think they do it every year. But what they look at is the broad picture of organised crime in Europe. Now, it focuses on a number of things, basically do with the digital economy and AI and all of that, not to get into it. But in it, it's talking about these hybrid threats where hostile states and criminal gangs are working together. Now, they're not just talking about cyber criminality. They're also talking about, actual criminal gangs. And what they're saying is that they both use each other. The criminal gangs use these hostile states to launder money, but the hostile states also use the criminal gangs to outsource certain crimes, including murders and things like that. Now, we have seen that before.
Yeah.
In
the Netherlands.
In the Netherlands, yeah. We've seen that in the Netherlands where they're basically saying these hybrid threat actors cooperate with criminals for mutual benefit, where they use each other's resources, expertise and protection. So it's obviously financial gain is the primary motivation for the criminals, but the other one is more complex beyond that, where some of these states will offer criminals safe haven, which was obviously said about the Kinahans that the Russian, in exchange for working with them and helping to generate money, that the Russians would offer them that protection if needed.
Should they require it, yeah.
But it's saying it allows these states, and Russia and Belarus are mentioned, though they're not specifically named in this section, but it's clear who they're referring to. But
and
they're
Iran,
also, and Iran and other countries along those lines, where it allows these states to deny direct involvement in certain crimes, where they would hire criminal actors. And the example, of course, is Iran using the Kinahan allies in the Netherlands to kill a dissident. And also they're using it to generate money.
Interestingly, that thing you're talking about there, I understand that has been more linked to the Kinahan grouping.
Yeah.
I mean, in particular in the Netherlands, the Dutch criminal Nicola Fassi, who was arrested in a Kinahan safe house here in 2016, he was returned from Ireland to the Netherlands, where he was facing a number of different charges in relation to a string of gangland murders there. But he was also convicted and sentenced for the murder of a guy called Mohammed Reza Kolahi Samidi, an Iranian dissident who was living in the Netherlands, and that happened in 2015. He was jailed for that in 2019, but he has since appealed and he's been acquitted of that murder. And I do understand from colleagues in the Netherlands that it's believed now that that murder was far more on the hands of the Kinahan organisation than their Dutch Moroccan allies that Fassi was one of, that it may have even been ordered directly from the Kinahans through their networks. Well, so your man Samidi was a member of the Mujahideen opposition movement, and he was convicted in absentia of the 1981 bombing of the Iran's Islamic Republican Party headquarters, which claimed 73 lives. He travelled to the Netherlands as a political refugee using the false identity Ali Mohamed in the 1980s. And he basically lived there undercover ever since, but was shot in the head outside his home in the town of Almere. And in 2015, it did take a while for them to realise who he was, to unscramble his background, because he was essentially on a witness protection programme. And that was an incredible sort of unravelling that was the first real suggestion that those networks, being the Mokra Mafia in the Netherlands, who were partnered with the Kinahan network and others that we've spoken about, Eden Gassanen and Rafael Imperiale and the Chilean Vega. What was his name again?
El Rico.
El Rico. So they were all working together, it was believed, and that they had taken instruction from Iran to find and to murder this enemy, I suppose, of the regime.
Yeah, you see, I suppose it goes back to the money laundering that Hezbollah have been linked to. Hezbollah, of course, it is always said that they're basically sponsored by the Iranian government, and that's where the connections are believed to have come from. Obviously, Iran and Russia have these strong ties now, and all of what you've described there, that intermingling and nexus of politics and criminality, like as this report is launched yesterday by Internal Affairs EU Commissioner Magnus Brunier, he says criminal networks that work on behalf of foreign powers, and he says that's something new. Some threats enter our union in less than a second as an encrypted message, for example, ordering an assassination of a rival drug dealer. Some threats enter in a few days, like a bus full of migrants paid by Russia. So they're talking about how, basically it says at some point that there's this DNA mutation of organised crime, and that local mafias are weaponized by teaming up with hostile state actors, is how it's described, and they carry out a kind of a hybrid warfare. And later on it's also described in one of the press releases how this, for the hostile states, it serves two purposes. It obviously serves the purpose of generating money, but they also describe it as a woodpecker modus operandi, where it undermines the very EU.
Chips away at it
gradually, and a kind of which is what the Russians used to believe, even in the communist era when they became involved in criminality, that they were undermining the EU in itself by having this going on. Yeah, so it's a very interesting...
It is, and I mean, just to go back briefly to the Kinahans, we have seen from, in particular, Christy Kinahan, that, anti-democracy sentiment that he has. I mean, he has been very pro-Yemen, pro-Putin in his ramblings, and, he likes to put that out there. He was anti-vac. He was all that sort of stuff that would feed in to all of that, isn't it? That anti-establishment.
Well, anti-establishment, yeah. I mean, certainly, look, these things have become more prominent in certain circles, no doubt. But it's this scepticism of the liberal order in the EU, I suppose. And that's why Putin, look, we can see in America the changing attitude towards Vladimir Putin. But yeah, Christy Kinahan, we had hundreds of posts over a relatively short period of time laying out his political philosophy. And that philosophy was, a certain detestation, I suppose, of the establishment of in Ireland and in the EU, and a sort of a championing of the Putin, really, I suppose, and some of that viewpoint.
Yeah, he was very pro him. I mean, how does this begin, or how did these people mix and mingle? I mean, you don't just get a phone call from Vladimir one day, want to speak to Christy. Like, how does this happen? Where I know they've been networking in all sorts of places through sport. Initially we would have had the Kinahans mixed up in a lot of horse racing in the UK, and sort of focusing on the possibility of laundering funds through that, meeting people, very rich people from sometimes, very anti-establishment states that own these horses. They were involving themselves or kind of dipping into the world of football, the world of boxing, and is that the place, I wonder, where these connections are made initially? And
well, I'd imagine a lot of it is in Dubai, to be honest. I mean, everybody is we always focus on the criminal figures in Europe who are based in Dubai. Like, that's always what we're looking at. But if you look at some of these investigation sites, like the Organised Crime Reporting Project and these other sites, they're heavily focused on political figures from Russia and other parts of Eastern Europe who are laundering money and have moved their money into Dubai. So that is a huge amount of their work. We kind of look at that sort of, almost as boring. So you have all of those people in still a relatively small country, mixing in the same circles that might not have been mixed in before. And right there are the opportunities. Obviously, the money laundering is a huge feature in Dubai.
And it now exists as a sort of a melting pot of all these criminals. I mean, there's perfectly ordinary people in Dubai as well, and teachers and nurses go out there to work. But there is this, underworld, this melting pot of sort of crooked politicians types and, those who've been sanctioned and have found refuge there. These massive, big criminal organisations. But how do they get in there in the first place? You'd have to go back with their own Kinahan organisation. It's surely those connections have to have been made initially in the UK when they were there before the turn of the century, and through then into that horse racing scene where you would have a lot of very wealthy Emiratis, you would have had a lot of royalty.
Yeah.
Mixing and mingling around there.
Look, no doubt the world of sports has provided an entry point for them, and the boxing as well. I mean, that's an old story, isn't it? Where the world of boxing is where in the US, where the mafia and regular businesses and showbiz all collided in one and mixed in. So look, the horse racing is the exact same, even though it's been maybe slightly more underground, but certainly in the UK, it's those points, and maybe in the point of sort of nightlife, like nightclubs and that, it's where all of these people could come together and swap their money, because there's something in it for every one of them. The report also goes into a good bit about the changes in cocaine trafficking in the EU. It focuses on how there have been record amounts of cocaine, but it looks at something that we have seen ourselves, where it's saying there is a diversification in terms of the transport methods, where the container shipments, like we've seen in Ireland, were probably still the most common, which is basically that cocaine is hidden in container ships, maybe of food or something like that, and brought into Europe. They're saying there's an increased diversification, and they're mentioning the rib boats, basically.
Yeah.
So they say at-sea drop-offs have become a more prominent modus operandi. It is further likely that some criminal networks have shifted to trafficking smaller amounts via multiple entry points on containers instead of multi-ton loads at one go. So they're saying these drop-offs have becoming, and they're focused on limiting their risk by a range of new techniques, rather than the big container ships, which we would see with our own, that certainly was almost exclusively how it was done. But again, this year we've seen again and again these rib boats going in and taking these at-sea drop-offs, which they seem to suggest is now a big thing.
The cyber attacks that they're so interested in making on, our own health service back in 2021 was the victim of one, wasn't it? The wizard spider.
Yeah.
Those gangs are not the drug gangs.
Well, it's what they're
separate. Yeah.
Well, what they're saying is that there is this mutation, and where all of these organizations, because of the rise of the digital economy, they have this intermingling that they wouldn't have had. Now, they are separate. I mean, the Kinahans aren't doing cyber attacks, but that we know of. But they have these, I suppose, these points of contact, and that, it is definitely changing. Now, the EU report focuses a lot on cybercrime, which is obviously a huge growth area, and it's something we don't probably cover enough of on Crime World. But there is a huge problem with that in a continent-wide, worldwide, and in Ireland, where there's an ability to generate huge amounts of money. Certainly, what they're saying is some of that is facilitated by these hostile states, who then, rather than even use that money to reinvest it in further sort of cyber criminal activities. So it's they're painting a picture which is not uncommon for journalism or any other type of industry, that things are changing very rapidly and technology is being utilized to change it. They have another section on how violence still underpins it all, but you can see that things are altered, and that they also speak about the how digital allows people to specialize, and they have people that are specializing in violence, actually, which we have seen on a micro level in Ireland, that there are people who use digital networks to be hired, and they'll go out and intimidate somebody out of your money, and that drug gangs don't need to have a foot soldier to do that they can find somebody to do it, kind of like a Uber service for.
But sure, wasn't Imre Arakas uncovered being part of a massive network of killers for hire in Marbella?
Exactly, and all of that isn't possible without some of this digital integration,
And of course, the Kinahans and others have shown quite having a strong technical wing, nearly.
Yeah, I mean, look,
they had their own phone network, their own encrypted phone network. They had the money to pay for that.
Yeah.
They've had the money to pay, for other forms of propaganda to be pushed out through the internet, and quite sophisticated, really. So, they probably do have a little cyber wing.
Yeah, and they have the far-sightedness, I suppose, to realise that things like cryptocurrencies, which again is featured in, that these were the way forward. And we also saw that with Georgie Mitchell. You can see these guys, like, they're not at the top of their criminal world for no reason.
Exactly.
That they were able to see these things 10 years ago even, or 6, 7 years ago, that this is the way of the future. Cyber currencies, having technology to facilitate it. It is incredible when you look at that,
I wonder, is Dubai going to be usurped?
Well, I mean, I think
coming to its end of its time, the way they costed it, in a way, because they are having to try and clean up their act somewhat, aren't they?
Well, they are, but we're going into a different geopolitical world, aren't we, as well, where, the US has stepped back from its sort of global role as monitoring, as the world's policeman, as they like to say over there. So maybe so, but maybe not. I mean, it certainly has been a PR problem for Dubai, but who's going to exert the pressure is Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump, of course, has a totally different attitude to places like Saudi Arabia than the Biden administration would have. He's very close to Saudi, very much a heavy investor. Has received investments for them. So there's no way of knowing, I suppose.
Right, it's all a bit scary, isn't it?
It's all a bit scary and a bit highbrow for for crime world.
Crime world, do you think? Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
A little bit. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who have a lot more understanding of all this than I have. Of course, that report is available for anybody who wants to read it. It's called the Organised Crime Threat Assessment, EU SUCTA. And it is published just on Europol's website.
Published on the Europol website.
Yeah. So there's a lot more in it if anybody is interested in this stuff and reading it. It's probably a very lengthy report. It's probably taken a few years to put together. And
yeah, look, it's 80 pages, and there are also, press conferences that have been said. But it's very interesting, I suppose, if you want to...
Bedtime reading, people.
Bedtime reading. Well, it might send you to sleep, all right.
All right, thanks, Niall.
Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.